So welcome everyone. It's a pleasure to see people this evening on this very important topic. Any day of the year would be appropriate to talk about the problem of mass incarceration in the United States, since it's an ongoing and horrible problem. There's not a particular day that it starts or stops. I'm going to talk about it from a particular perspective, ethical Jewish perspective, and then I'll turn it over to Betsy, who will talk about the more practical perspective of what we can do. There's so many people who have spoken on mass incarceration. So much ink has been spilled. What can I say that will add over here to the discussion? Well, I'm bringing in two different angles over here. One is as a scholar of ancient texts, and the other is as a humanities academic. So that's why you're going to hear both about in the coming minutes. You'll hear both about the Hebrew Bible and about Foucault. In the same one after the other. Let me just preface this. As everybody gathered here knows, the United States has a huge problem with incarceration. It has the highest incarceration rate in the world. There's no developed country in the world that even comes close to the U.S. There's no competition. Like a lot of things, the U.S. is number one. And this is not something that we need to be proud of at all. We need to be deeply ashamed of the rate of incarceration here. And also similarly, it also just clearly does not work because you also look at what's called recidivism, for better or for worse, and rates are 2/3 more of people who end up in jail than end up returning to the same system. And so it's something is wrong. Something is deeply broken in a system that that has so many literally millions of people in jail at a time. At any particular time, something is very broken. You can just look at in comparison to other countries, and I don't like comparing other countries because of cultural. There are different cultures, different places. But if you just look at other countries in terms of their rate of incarceration and their rate of recidivism, we're not doing well at all in either metric. I'm going to talk about it from the humanist perspective, and then I'm going to bring in the Jewish perspective. From the humanist perspective, humanist philosophy, our humanism, humanist ethics are deeply influenced by utilitarianism. And one of the principles of utilitarianism is the greatest good for the most people. Obviously, when we're jailing upwards of 2 million people, at any given time in the United States, we're not doing a lot of good for a lot of people. And so we have a lot of systems of incarceration around the world, and we see where we are, and we're not measuring well. So we're obviously other countries are doing things better than we are. And they have better ideas, they have better systems, and so it's morally incumbent, based on humanist ethics, to actually examine where we are going wrong. What is it that's so horrible over here? And so just that's the moral imperative. I'm going to go back to my days in grad school. In grad school, I read a work that really deeply affected me, and a work by Foucault called, what was it? Discipline and Punish. And it's a work on around incarceration. Foucault's ideas that deeply resonated with me was this idea of discourses. We have a discourse in the Western world that for crimes, there's a punishment of incarceration. And that in the United States, that's if you do something wrong, if you break the law, then you're sent to jail. That's what happens. There's no, there's no that's the go-to system. So that's the discourse. The discourse around discipline and punishment is that if you do something that's against the law, you go to jail. There's no, that's the go-to. There's no, there's not. Yes, there's talk about rehabilitation, about compensation, about community service. Yes, but those are always secondary and tertiary. The first and foremost, you do something wrong, you go to jail. And that's the discourse, and that discourse is deeply ingrained in the way we think about discipline and punishment in the Western world, and especially in the United States. And so, one thing that Foucault pointed out is that it is so very hard to escape discourses. When a discourse becomes dominant in a society, it is so very hard to break free from that discourse. To move out of it and to think of things in a different way. It's just like that pattern of thinking is so ingrained in us that if you break the law, you go to jail. And it's really hard. We're raised on ideas of police and of jails and of bad guys and of good guys, and it's just kind of. Our games are constructed, as children, our games are constructed around it. Just there's a whole entire discourse, a way of thinking that is so ingrained in our society that it is simply very hard to escape it. And so, it's hard, despite it being hard to imagine that there are other ways of dealing with people who are destructive to society. It is or behavior that is destructive to society. There was the phenomenon of incarceration is a modern phenomenon, not it wasn't. It's something. A mass incarceration is only something rich countries can afford, because it costs so very much to incarcerate anyone. And so now I'm going back for a second to the ancient world. In the ancient world, jailing people for crimes just was not something you did. It wasn't part. It wasn't the. We have instances, stories in the Hebrew Bible and in the New Testament and in other sources about people being put in jail, but it's the exception. It's and the function of jails. The function of jails then were what we would think of as holding cells until something was decided. We're putting. We need to decide. We don't want this person to be in society for whatever reason, and we're deciding what shall be done with them. Now, I'm not trying to say that the systems of ethics practiced in the ancient world are better or more benevolent. They most evidently were not. I don't take my sense of ethics from the Hebrew Bible. And as humanists, we like as I said before, where we draw some of our deepest thinking about ethics is from utilitarian philosophy. From modern philosophical movements, not from ancient ones. But we can look at the way things were and see, and we can be students of history over here and just see, how things worked in societies that did not incarcerate. It just wasn't a thing that you did. And so there are all kinds of different types of how you dealt, how you rehabilitated somebody, or how you punished someone. There's a lot more. There was a use of fining, very prevalent. There's a use of brutal. If you injure somebody's hand, your hand will be injured. obviously not systems that is also very direct, very brutal. There was lashes, corporeal punishment. All these. What I'm not saying, I'm not advocating for any of these, but what I'm trying to say is that they didn't have that discourse. They didn't have that idea that there was just, if you do this crime, you're in a maximum security prison for 5 years, and if you do that crime, you're in a minimum security prison for 2 years. That wasn't that. They didn't measure. They were more thoughtful about how you made restitution. They were, that kind of thinking. That kind of thinking is a more thoughtful type of dealing with problems in society, with a behavior that is detrimental to society. And so, what I encourage everyone is to break this discourse. I'm going to end this with my stepfather-in-law, who was a conservative. He died a number of years ago. He was mostly conservative, fairly staunch. But one thing that he was really did not agree with most conservative politicians and thinking was around incarceration, because he worked in the court systems in Baltimore, and he just saw the number of people who were jailed for offenses that nonviolent offenses involving the use of drugs. And it was just like this, like it just happened again and again, and he just said, this is not fair. And so people often were removed from this, but people who see it can become deeply affected and see how unfair it is. And that's why it's very important for visibility is very important to know that this is a problem, to have it in our faces, because this is one of the most horrible ills, one of the most in American society. And there's not one solution. Of course, there's not one solution, because it's complex. But one thing that has to happen is the breaking of the discourse, the shattering of this discourse around incarceration. Without further ado, then I'm going to, that serves as an introduction, and now I'm going to turn it over to Betsy. Thank you.
Yeah, so mostly what I'm talking about is writing prisoners, but in terms of changing the discourse, there is a woman called Ruth Wilson Gilmore who talks about prison abolition, who I think is probably the best speaker on various alternatives to prison, which is mostly not what I'm talking about tonight. But I encourage you all to look her up. I've put her name in the chat. I'd also encourage you to look up, Utah does a lot of stuff that is basically, I want to call it outward bound for prisoners. It's not quite that, but it's sort of, okay, you've been in a terrible environment and, quite possibly doing, bad antisocial things that we'd really like you to stop doing. We're going to take you out of that environment and get you walking around in the wilderness for a while. And it has, more than two problems, but in terms of both going back to prison rates and in terms of just straight not being horrible and abusive, it is better than prison. And so I would encourage people to look into that, because unlike a lot of other alternative to prison models, since Utah does a lot of it, we actually have a lot of numbers and a lot of like, hey, here's what happens when you do this, blah, 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 blah. Anyway, that's not what I'm here to talk about. I'm here to talk about writing letters to prisoners. All right, so I'm talking about writing letters to prisoners. So people exist in the American prison system. You can write them letters, even if you don't know them. There are websites like the appropriately named writeaprisoner.com, where you can find people who have personal ads and have posted about like what they're like and why you should write them letters. These people are often very lonely and very bored, because prison is very lonely and boring. And I'm going to tell you why and how you should use some of your precious and valuable time to write prisoners on these websites letters. All right. So what kind of good are you doing if you write a prisoner? So we talked a bit about utilitarianism, but this is not the utilitarian type of good if you are writing letters to prisoners. If you want to get sort of the most bang for your buck, there are many causes that will promise you and, actually be telling the truth when they say, You can help hundreds of thousands of people for a modicum of effort. You can, get 10 vaccines to people for $10 or something. And these causes are great. You can go look on givewell.com. They tend to rate charities by this. I like them. They're very good. This isn't what we're doing. If you're writing a prisoner, you're mostly just helping one person, the person that you're writing. And you're making his life more bearable because he or she or they, although I will default to he in this chat because all of the prisoners I am writing now are male. He's a person that's been kind of cast aside or discarded or forgotten by the world. They're a person whose life has been defined by the worst thing they ever did. And that's the kind of thing that makes a person miserable and small, and honestly, often a worse person, because if the world sees you as the worst thing you ever did, eventually you're going to start seeing yourself as that too. So if you're writing a prisoner, the thing that you're doing when you talk to a guy about his life, when you tell him about a cool project you're doing, when you ask him to teach you magic tricks or draw him into an RPG, you're making him feel like a little more human, like a person who's sort of more than a crime in a body. And it may not be utilitarian in terms of bang for the buck, but the depth of impact you can make is kind of crazy. Like you can just talk about your favorite books and your really bad breakups, and you ask them about their favorite books and really bad breakups. And maybe you talk music theory or sneaker culture or dance. And then 6 months later, you get a letter that's like, you changed my life. I finally feel like I can talk to other people now. Like maybe I'm worth caring about. And you're like, dude, I literally just asked you about your shoes. So you know how sometimes snarky people on Twitter say things like, you just did a basic decency, you don't deserve a cookie? Well, if you give basic decency to prisoners, they will give you cookies or like send you cool mail and cards and things, because prison is pretty short on basic decency, and you will write letters and then you will have a ridiculous outsized effect on changing people's lives. All right, so why write prisoners? First reason is to do good. This is the reason many people do things like donate to causes. Most causes want money. Writing prisoners wants your soul. So you can do this even if you don't have that much money or you donate already. The second answer is to feel good, which sort of builds off of this. Many people who want to do good works feel like they're bad people if, the good works they do also make them feel good. This is bullshit and a good way and a bad way of incentivizing good works. Writing prisoners will totally make you feel good. You will feel awesome. You will feel like a superhero. Yeah, the dirty secret of a lot of causes, not actually that dirty, is they want your money, and you will get gratification because you're totally giving them money, which is nice, and giving people money is nice. But if you write a prison pen pal, they will totally care about you as an individual person with all of your individual quirks and flaws. And this is super, super gratifying. All right, third answer, because prisoners are interesting. Any prisoner who writes you back is probably interesting. Boring prisoners don't write back. So seriously, remember how I said prison is really boring? A lot of these people, sort of if they wanted to or not, have done a lot of introspection and have a lot of interesting things to say about, life, the universe, and everything. And there's a prison subculture that is itself really interesting. And frankly, I suspect nobody here is really that familiar with, although I could be wrong. And you can ask people questions about it and they will tell you about it, because boy, do people like talking about themselves and their experiences. So then why would you write letters? Most prisoners don't get email. Sometimes you can send prisoners email, but prison email is run by weird, sketchy, monopolistic companies. You have to pay a bunch of money to send them email, and the prisoners have to pay money to get the emails, and it's a scam. And also each email can only be 2,000 characters, which kind of suck, especially since they're charging you money to send the email. And prison phone calls are capped at 15 minutes. They're also really expensive. And also maybe you don't want to phone someone you've never actually met. But letters, they're the only way to get unlimited words into the prison system. Also the only way to get drawings and pictures, since the scammy email services don't let you send those. Side note here, I have a couple of friends who are intimidated by writing letters, so they just send pictures, either pictures they draw themselves or just pretty pictures they print from the internet. This is highly appreciated, especially there are a lot of prisoners who do art because it is something you can do in prison, and they're always looking for art trades. So Ray said to include cute anecdotes about stuff I've done, gotten, interacted with people in prison. So the first is, oh boy, people in prison who are writing you back often read books and want to talk to people about these books. A guy who I started writing really, really liked The Alchemist. So I actually ended up reading The Alchemist, and because I was like, okay, this book is short and seems good. And then we spent a lot of time talking about like, all right, what does it mean to follow your heart? And like, is it just following your instincts? What if your instincts are pretty bad? You know, et cetera, et cetera. Another book I ended up reading was Prince of Thorns, which is a very good fantasy book. A lot about the nature of free will, etc. Another guy who I'm writing has started teaching me magic tricks because magic tricks are really cool. And I've always been too bashful to ask someone to teach me them since I have like no manual dexterity, except I've totally got this guy to teach me magic tricks. And he sends me like gaff cards and stuff, and it's great. Another guy, we started talking about D&D, and so I'm not exactly sure of the timeline of this, but at some point he actually was in a prison gang and then checked himself into protective custody to get out of the prison gang because he was like, wow, this prison gang is super bullshit. And honestly, I realized I would rather just like hang out and play D&D than like fight over lunch tables and like petty, stupid status games where everyone's like, it's all about respect. But actually, you're fighting over a lunch table, and this is stupid, and I want to do something else with my life. And that was pretty cool. All right, next slide. Right, more things. More cute anecdotes, which is also one of the people I'm writing totally makes pop-up cards. He's like teaching himself to draw. So this was the New Year's card I got. It has a pop-up dog. It's super cute. These are all of the Halloween cards I got because people will totally send you Halloween cards. Also, as said, a lot of people draw in prison because it's a thing you can do. This was the one on the left was a guy I was writing to got an envelope and then made another envelope to stick inside another. So until there was like 8 or 9, and then a teeny tiny Halloween card inside, which was pretty fun. And also I was sitting at a coffee table and kept unwrapping envelopes, and the people at the coffee house were looking at me like, what? An outdoor table too. So yay. So, all right, how do you write a prisoner? The first thing you do is you Google, in quotes, write a prisoner. No, seriously, there are like 6 sites with names like writeaprisoner.com and prisonpenpals.com, and they will all pop up on Google if you do this. Every single site that does this looks like it was built in 1996. I don't know why. Then you can go on these sites and browse the profiles of prisoners. They're generally word limited, so they're a bit like the personal ads you used to see in newspapers, which are pretty delightful to read. There are a lot of profiles of a lot of prisoners, and it's okay to be picky about who you write. Most of these sites have search bars of your friend. If you have any hobby or obsession, piece of media you're like, or whatever that you'd love to share, chances are there's someone in jail who loves the thing you love. So writing your first letter, print or write your first letter on 8.5 by 11 inch white paper, single-sided black ink. Many prisons have very, 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 very weird rules about how letters must be written, but this rule of thumb will get you through all but the most like weird and Byzantine security system. If you can't provide legal help to your pen pal and don't want to date your pen pal, state that right at the beginning of the letter, that you can't provide legal help and aren't looking for romance. A lot of people in services write advertising either legal help or romance, and it's best to sort of get that out of the way. That's not what you're doing. If you're intimidated by writing a long letter, write a short letter. A lot of people are super happy to get any letter. If you're intimidated by a short letter, send a drawing or a cool picture and maybe write hi on the back. Honestly, anything you do is better than nothing. If you're uncomfortable sharing your real address, get a PO box. Honestly, virtual PO boxes exist. They work for this purpose, and they're trivial to get. So do it. Sometimes when you write people don't write back. There are a lot of reasons for this. Sometimes people have moved and their address hasn't been updated. Sometimes people are in a depressive funk. Sometimes people get early parole. Sometimes people have other shit on their minds. If you write and you don't get a reply within, say, a month, don't get disheartened, find someone else and write again. Or you can find a few interesting sounding profiles, write a few people and see who writes back. That's what I did, and that's why I have 5 pen pals. I wrote to 10 people, got 5 replies, yay. Sometimes people who you're writing in prison write a lot. They're bored and lonely. It's not uncommon to get like a 5-page missive on something that's troubling a guy. This may be a selling point for some people. It's way more an interesting thing to find than bills in your mailbox. But like, please don't get anxiety ridden and think you have to write a 5-page missive back. You don't. The question I get a lot is, how often should you write? I honestly cannot stress this enough. Anything is better than nothing. You can write once a week, write once a week. You can write once a month, write once a month. You can only send silly pictures once every 6 months, maybe if you remember, then do that. There's no amount of care that's like too small or won't be appreciated. That said, if you know you can't write very often, it's nice to put a note about that in your initial letter, so that the person isn't left in suspense or thinking like, did I do something wrong, when they write you and then they don't hear back for several months. So what should you write? Anything you generally write in a tweet, a Tumblr post, a blog post, a letter, or a secret letter to a person you never would have met in any other context, rambles about hobbies, the world, whatever. Or if you really want something different, I've created an RPG for prisoners. So probably the project I'm most excited about in my life right now is me and a bunch of nerds on the outside and a bunch of nerds on the inside are playing a freeform retro future sci-fi RPG. This RPG is called Larp. I started this because I have professional experience in like my real day job. I run a company for role-playing games meant for less experienced players called Mirror World Creations. A lot of the games you pay for, this game is totally pro bono for incarcerated and non-incarcerated people, which means it's totally free for everyone. For those of you who don't know what RPGs or LARPs are, or haven't spent the last 13 years playing Dungeons and Dragons, we're telling a collective story about a bunch of surveyors, like map makers, explorers in a sci-fi universe. This is the website you go on if you want to see this and also everything else I'm doing. Yay. So it's a pretty rich, strange sci-fi universe. It's retro-futurist, like George Lumiere's A Trip to the Moon, or John Carter of Mars, or if you want modern Jupiter Ascending, or Catherine Valente's Radiance, any sort of universe where like Venus has lush jungles and Mars has princesses. So sort of a campy sci-fi universe. So the first thing you do is you create a character who lives in this campy sci-fi universe. This is a character that someone's writing letter as. This is actually my character. So she's a surveyor. She's sort of snotty and aristocratic and has addiction problems, and all of that provides plot hooks. And all of the prisoners might make up characters, and all of the other people on the outside make up characters, and all of these characters are writing letters to each other in space. So, and then you end up, since you're telling a collective story, you're making a collective plot. Which means, say, Victoria's player makes something up, sends a letter to Morgan's player and Jack's player about it. They both reply, add plot to that, and come up with more plot, and so it goes. So, like, here we have the example that's like, Victoria's like, oh my gosh, I was exploring the third moon of Mu, and somebody tried to assassinate me with hundreds of glass spiders. Who would do such a thing? And then Quinn replies with, like, the 7 princesses of Set originally created glass spiders and are the only ones who have access to hundreds at a time. And then Jack writes back and says, surveys has run-in with the 7 princesses of Set before. And they tend to get violent when they're afraid someone might expose their secrets. I wonder if there's something on the third moon of Mu they don't want us to find. And then Maddox responds and says, my sister Hinata works in the upper echelons of survey and says they've been receiving odd reports about the third moon. I should ask if she can tell me more. And then Jack comes back again and says, I've got a score to settle with the 7 princesses of Set. I'm heading to the third moon now. Victoria, if you've been dealing with glass spiders, you should get yourself checked for the doctor. And so on and so forth. Yeah, we're basically writing our own comic book adventure together. So how do we coordinate this storytelling? Players on the outside, i.e. not in jail, coordinate by email and also by a chat client called Discord. We discuss character concepts, plot ideas, how to make things fun for prisoners. Among other things, every time we receive a letter to a prisoner, we add a sentence or two summary of what the letter said to the story so far Google Doc, so we can keep track of like what's happening in everyone's stories. And every month I print this Google Doc and send it to all the guys inside so they can coordinate too. So if you like having stories, if you like telling stories, or think you might have fun writing letters as a fictional character, you should totally dip your toe into this. A lot of people who don't think they have anything interesting to write in letters about themselves have a story or a character in their head. And hey, have I mentioned RPGs are really popular in prison? A lot of guys like telling stories but never really had the chance to before. A lot of people in the outside have similar situations. Also, RPGs are just extremely weird in that they're one of the things besides religion. So a lot of prisons, especially in Texas and California, you end up with gangs that are divided along racial lines, which is terrible for a lot of really obvious reasons that I'm not going to go into. There are two things that allow people to more or less make friendship groups that don't get penalized for not being on racial lines. One is like the religious group. So there's like the Jewish guys and the Christian guys or whatever, and they all sit together and, at their own lunch table, and who the hell cares, whether some of them are white or some of them are black or whatever. And the other is D&D. Dungeons and Dragons, RPGs, RPG groups somehow they've been given a pass by prison culture of yeah, whatever, you can have a black guy and white guy sitting together if they're playing D&D together, that's fine. So RPGs somehow are super awesome and pro-social in prison. And there's a lot of talk about why this must be. I can theorize. I'm not going to theorize right now. There are a lot of articles also theorizing. Anyway, RPGs, super positive. So I know it's fashionable to sort of hear the word escapism and sneer, but honestly, guys, if you were locked in a concrete block, you would want some escapism too. And maybe you kind of have been locked in a concrete block. We've been in quarantine for upwards of a year, and we could all use a little escapism maybe. So come play around in a story about space travelers with some guys in prison and some other people not in prison. It's super fun. Also, if striking up a personal conversation with someone you don't know seems a little intimidating, but you still want help, you should come join our RPG. But even if you don't want to join our RPG, write letters, have friendships. Anyway, if you've got any questions for me, or indeed the rabbi or Ray or whoever else, now's the time to ask, I think.
Thank you, Betsy. You can stop sharing your screen.
Yeah, I'm stopping there.
Okay. Yeah. Does anyone have any questions?
I thought this was wonderfully informative, Betsy. I really liked your. It's fascinating to me that role-playing games are a part of prison culture. It's just I was I would say a moderate D&D player as a child.
Yay.
Or as a teenager. No, not. I know enough to know the lingo, but I wasn't I wasn't a dungeon master or anything. But that aside, it's just the richness of the world that you described is one that most of us don't have a window to, and I just appreciate that you offered us that window. And it seems like a very low bar to help out people who are just thirsting for human contact. And I appreciate that you are offering us this opportunity.
All right. Also, somebody else named Betsy in the chat has just asked, would you please repeat the criteria for writing the initial letter? Thank you. And I can repeat this, but I'm also going to share my notes with everybody in this chat, which has the criteria for writing letters and also a bunch of other things. Do you want me to repeat it out loud as well?
If you would, I'd appreciate it. And then I was also wondering if you could explain, because I think I lost this in your speech. One would find somebody to write in a prison or a jail on a website, but then write a hard copy letter through the Postal Service, correct?
Yes, that is exactly correct.
Okay, and one can choose, I want somebody, in this age range or this gender or this locale, or can you talk a little bit about that kind of,
okay.
What should we be looking for? Can we say, we'd like to find somebody Jewish, or we want to find somebody who's Baha'i,
Baha'i.
Yeah, right?
Yeah.
Whatever it is. Could you spend a couple minutes or a minute
Yes.
sharing those little details with us. Thank you.
Yes. So I'm just going to go to rateaprisoner.com, which is the largest of the websites. There are inmate profiles on rateaprisoner.com. You can search by age, you can search by year served, you can search by sex or gender, you can search by race or ethnicity, you can search by religion, you can search by sexual orientation, you can search by state. You can also search by name or by keyword. So if you wanted to search, say, Dungeons and Dragons, you could totally search that. Peter is asking on chat, should they be by hand or typed? Do you give your home address? They can be either by hand or typed. Just with typed, with by hand and typed, it has to be in black ink. Do you give your home address? I do. Some people don't feel comfortable doing so. That's who I recommend PO boxes for, but nothing is stopping you from giving your home address. Sorry, Betsy, what else did you want to know about searching and finding people to write?
Sorry, I was on a roll before. Now I've kind of forgotten.
Could you share your screen and show how you look for a pen?
Yeah, maybe. Yes, that would be great. Right, to like walk us through, like, let's say you're going to find another person.
Okay. Cool. I'm going to share my screen. I totally know how to do that. I totally already did that once. I can do that again. That's the thing I can do.
It's on the bottom. Oh, okay.
Here we are. All right. Y'all can see this?
Yes.
Okay. So this is actually rateaprisoner.com. I'm actually going back a few. So here's just rateaprisoner.com. You can see it at the URL bar. And you are looking for a pen pal. So you click pen pal, search inmate prison pen pal profiles. Oops, did I accidentally search someone? Right, inmate profiles. I'm just going to look at inmates recently updated. You can see some inmates. You can just browse this way.
Have these people said that they're interested in having a pen pal, or are they just the newest meat in prisons and jails?
They are people who have said that they're interested in having a pen pal. So I'm looking at inmate profiles now. If I want to search, this is the sort of basic search bar. Well, you can search by age, sex, race, and ethnicity, et cetera, et cetera. Sorry, now I'm looking. Advanced search. Then you go to advanced search and you scroll down. I tend to find keywords in profile very helpful. So I'm going to search creative writing here. Search. Scroll down, scroll down, scroll down, scroll down. And then you get a bunch of guys who say, hey, I'm interested in creative writing. And you can search by any of these other criteria as well. You can fill in one, you can fill in all. I remember you asking if these people had all signed up to have pen pals, and the answer is yes. This is not just the list of everyone who has gone to jail.
How do they post their ads?
They send hard copy letters into the, usually, they send hard copy letters into a place like rateaprisoner.com, and rateaprisoner.com transcribes them, and then you can look at them. There are now sort of weird, extremely limited tablets that in some prisons that give prisoners extremely limited internet access, but I've only heard of one prisoner having those, and I would not expect any given prisoner to have one of those. So usually they are literally sending in a hard copy letter and being like, hi, my name's Jim, I like Oscar Wilde, and then the people who work for these sites transcribe them.
I just want to say thanks to Betsy for, this is Remy. Thank you for sharing this.
Thank you.
It's really awesome to, I mean, I assume it's okay for people of any age. Are there like legal restrictions hovering out there that kids are not allowed to, I'm assuming anybody can write, correct?
Anybody can write. Some of the prison pen pal sites will say you must be over 18 to use this because blah, blah, blah. Basically, we don't want to get sued. Oh, I see other questions in the chat. Gabriel asks, how do you know if these chat sites are reputable / legit? The answer is you don't, and a lot of them probably aren't. And some of them, you know, charge prisoners money or do various other things. But honestly, they're what we have, so we use them. There doesn't seem to be a sort of gold standard, this site is super legit, et cetera, et cetera. And honestly, they have the addresses up. So once you get the address, you're not like going through them once you have an address. So yeah, honestly, sometimes the people who run these sites are weird, but it's what we got. I also see Peter asking what type topics are absolutely verboten. No way to write or ask or disclose. So generally, if you put porn or graphic violence in a letter, it will be censored. The prison administration won't let it go through. What counts as porn or graphic violence sure does depend on the particular prison and the particular administration. Also, some prisons will have things like, you know, you must use this kind of paper. A lot of prisons have no maps, not even fantasy maps. It might be some sort of tricky escape plan. A lot of prisons now have don't use colored paper because there's some very complicated way people can use colored paper to sneak drugs in. Why black ink? I have absolutely no idea. I just know it's a rule. I have gotten so many answers, including, again, the thing about drug smuggling, something about people having to scan letters and it being easier to read if you black ink, et cetera, et cetera. I have no clue. Keywords never to use. Generally, since it's letters, you generally have a person reading this. You're not dealing with a system that just like flags keywords. So what you more have to worry about is, will a random prison guard read this paragraph and think that I am encouraging crime or plotting an escape or sending lots and lots of porn in? How many letters do prisoners get in re-stamps and stationery? That varies a hell of a lot between facilities. Sorry, a lot of what you'll get from me is it turns out the American prison system isn't very coordinated. There are a lot of federal prisons which have, guidelines straight down. And then there are state prisons, which is what most people are in, that then break down by counties. And so like every county has its own rules and it's wild. How many letter privileges do prisoners get re-stamped stationery? All commissaries have to sell stamps. They have to sell stamps at stamp prices. This is poor if your prisoner had, at face value. So like if your stamp is $55, they have to sell the stamp at 55 cents if the stamp is 55 cents. The pens / only in pencil question, that's again, depends on the facility. I tend to go with do pen, do black ink, because that's less likely to get your letter thrown out or sent back to you. More likely they'll just send it back to you and be like, you need to use black ink. But there are some facilities that are totally fine with pencil. What materials can you write on and what can they use or are provided? That's another depends on the facility's answer. I tend to give my answer, if you want to be really cautious, use only white legal paper or white 8.5 by 11 printer paper. But it depends on your specific prison again. prisoners tend to have, one of the things that prisoners tend to have a lot of access to, unlike almost anything else, is pens and paper, which is why you get a lot of them writing and a lot of them drawing. Can you find out ahead of writing? Yes, you can find out ahead of writing. Usually, a lot of the sites, certainly writeaprisoner.com, tends to have, hey, this person's at Ironwood State Prison. Here's how you can send letters. Here's the restrictions. These are not always up to date. You can also, if it says, hey, this person's at Ironwood State Prison, you can go onto Ironwood State Prison's website and see what their restrictions are. Again, they don't always update their stuff in a timely fashion, but you do what you can do. Sorry to everyone if this was answered. My handwriting is terrible. Can I type and send? Yes. In fact, many people prefer if you type and send, especially if your handwriting is terrible. The prisoners often prefer this because then they don't have to decipher your terrible handwriting. The prison guards often prefer this. We're not doing this for them, but I guess it's nice for prison guards to also have a slightly more pleasant life. Are there length limitations for letters? So not per letter, but some places say, hey, you're only allowed to have 5 pieces of paper per envelope. So if you go longer than 5 pages double-sided, you need to send those in 2 separate envelopes. But again, that's one of the things that varies from prison to prison. All right, anything else?
I have a question, and if it's okay, I'm just going to speak rather than text.
Oh, yeah.
Write it out. Okay, thank you. So for this month's Rosh Chodesh group, we watched 13 or 13th or whatever that movie's called. And I'm sorry. And anyway, it's a migraine day, so my brain's not working so well. But it seems as though there are an awful lot of people in prison and prisons and jails currently. And I forget the right word, and maybe you can help me. Waiting to be sentenced,
Yes.
kind of like in a holding cell thing.
Yeah.
So if I were to do this, I know some people just are there for longer than a minute, but my question is there a way on that site to ascertain whether this is the person's, what's the right word, conviction, and would probably be there for a while, or just temporary?
There are ways. So first off, when a lot of times when people are in jail for holding reasons, they don't get on these websites. But also you can look up sentence length, what they were convicted for, et cetera. Sentence length is probably the one you want for, like, okay, is this guy going to leave in a minute? All right. There's some more questions in the chat. Ray said, you said some places don't allow double-sided. Right. There are some prisons in Texas that don't allow double-sided. I don't know why. I hate it so much. I'm a fiend for double-sided, but yeah. So so for them, it's 5 pages single-sided. Another policy. Okay. Are they allowed to save them, store them for how long? Usually prisoners are allowed to save and store their letters. They can be taken away, just like you can take prisoners' pictures away and a lot of other things, and put limits on the numbers of pictures prisoners are allowed to have and what the content can be. It's really horrible, and I don't like that prisons can do this and will just sort of arbitrarily or seemingly arbitrarily put up rules being like, you can't have more than 17 pieces of paper. Guess you got to throw out some of your letters. It varies by prison. There's not, the federal prison guidelines, which are generally the standard for everyone else, are like, yes, prisoners can keep all of their damn letters. Like, yes. If you're dealing with something else, it's some state or county prison being awful, you will find those. But the default is that they're allowed to save all their letters. And then Jessica asks, which website did you use to match with your pen pals? Was it the one you gave your mini tutorial on a few minutes ago? Yes, I use writeaprisoner.com. Can the public help reform the more stringent letter writing policies? Yes. In fact, oh Lord, sorry, I'm actually going to try and find a link. Okay, so one of the things that happens is JPay is a company that I do not like. It has a monopoly on prison. It has actually a duopoly on prison emails and a lot of phone calls, and it's generally a jerk and charges a lot of money. One of the nice things about signing up for JPay, though, is that they are required to tell you about all public hearings about things like, you know, letter writing length and phone length and charging people for phones and all of that other stuff. And so I am now getting a bunch of emails that's like, there's a public hearing on this thing. Would you like to send in a comment? Would you like to participate, et cetera, et cetera? So that is a lovely way, if you are willing to show up at a public hearing, even on something like Zoom, to be like, hey, these policies are terrible. And look at me, I'm eloquent and look like I'm, you know, part of your demographic lawmakers, so you should listen to me and do the thing I want. It is very fun to go into these public hearings, which are often sort of ill-attended, and you'll drop a lot of research onto them. It doesn't always get you the thing you want. Like, people are obstinate and people are really awful about, you know, treating people in prison well, but it's a thing. Sorry, Peter, can you restate that question? Okay, public, not senators or officials, get involved with reform changes. These are public hearings. So senators and officials are also involved with these, but they're public hearings, which means the public is allowed to come and allowed to be like, hey, lawmakers, we think you should do this. Are these meetings reported? Yes, they have to be reported by law. They are often reported at, like, you know, page 156 of the briefing of, here are a bunch of public hearings going on in the United States right now. This is why having the JPay thing is actually sort of a nice cheat, because I don't have to go through 156, like, hey, there's a public hearing about whether people can have chickens within city limits in Peoria, to find the things I actually care about.
How can someone sign up for these updates if, say, one wants to add this to the social action update for their community?
Okay, so go to JPay, go to JPay. Know that JPay is a terrible, terrible company, and, like, I would not say giving them money is bad, because giving them money is the only way you can communicate into some prisons. But, like, know that I do not endorse this company. However, they will send you all of the emails about all of the public hearings, and I have not found a more reliable way to get them.
How did you start this?
I was so I had been writing. I was really bored in quarantine, is the short answer. There's a bit more backstory, but doing a lot of this was, wow, I guess I'm, you know, me this time last year being like, golly, I guess I'm locked in my house. This sucks. What should I do with myself? And I'd been volunteering for a few things, and now they were like, you should not be volunteering for us. You should not be leaving your house. So yeah, that thing.
And is it safe to, you know, just pragmatically, is it safe to write to someone who has been convicted of a crime?
I mean, is it safe to cross the street? Like,
I don't go out anymore.
Like, honestly, all right, my feelings on this are something like, so first I share my address because I'm like, these are people who are locked up in jail. Of the people who are likely to stalk me by my address, people who are literally locked in a place are like really low on that list. But also, if you don't want to share that, get a PO box. At which point, there's very little that they can do. I mean, I think the worst thing they could presumably do would be like to write you a mean letter, at which point you could just never reply. I think the risk is pretty low.